Hello and welcome to this week's myNewsWrap, news from the world of SAP, Microsoft and the world in between. Let's start with the news from the SAP side. Not too many still, unfortunately, so hopefully there will be more next week when there is SAP TechEd, but at least some very valuable news. First one is the Kyma runtime is now also available on the GCP, so on the Google Cloud Platform. So you can now really choose wherever you want to deploy Kyma to from your SAP BTP account, be it AWS, Azure. Those two have been available for a while, and now also GCP. So you can also, this blog post references the setup options and all the regions where it's available. And which VM sizes you can have there. So if this was something that you have been waiting for to get your Kyma running on Google, here you go. And then another news from the area of, let's say, more open source and tooling wise. There have been quite some announcements this week around the SAP Fiori tooling, or by the SAP Fiori tooling team, which means a lot of new experimental features are available. And there is the release of the OpenUX tools as an NPM package. And that's also referenced here within the tweet that I have in the show notes, which contains the links to those two blog posts around these new features when you develop with the SAP Fiori tools. With that, as I said, not too many news from the SAP side. Let's switch to the Microsoft part of the house, and there is quite some stuff to announce. First of all, there is now a preview version available for Azure Functions, which is an Azure SQL binding. So you have an input and an output binding in order to read and save data to the database. That's cool and quite surprising that that's available as of now and was not available earlier. But yeah, you can also use it as stated within the documentation with Azure SQL, so with the Azure managed service on Azure, but also with the regular SQL Server database. That's cool. Then let's stay at the serverless world. There is now also the Azure Functions API extension general available. This open API extension has been in preview mode since quite some time. And as of now, it's GA and started as a community-driven extension that you can build on. Microsoft took that over, and now it's really an official extension. It supports, unfortunately, as with the preview version, only .NET-based functions. So you have .NET Core 3.1, 5, and 6 now. And there it supports also all flavors, so in-process and out-of-process workers. And it's very well integrated within Visual Studio 2022. So if you fulfill this requirement, you can use it. Now, I already spoiled the next announcement that is out this week. Azure Functions 4.0 is out, and this means that it fully supports .NET 6 with in-process and out-of-process workers, which is quite cool. So really, right from the start of the available of .NET 6, Azure Functions support them. Of course, the new Azure Functions release also supports Node.js, Python, and Java and PowerShell. However, Node.js, for example, that starts with version 14. And I guess later this month, probably there will be support for 16 when this becomes the new LTS release. The blog post that I've referenced in the show notes guides you through what's out there and references all the additional information from the documentation side that is necessary to get things going. Then, from the durable function side, there is one very cool GitHub README contribution by Chris Gillum around the durable task framework history events. So what event types are there and what do they mean? And that really helps you a lot when you want to dig into the analysis, what's happening when a durable function gets executed. However, this is only valid for the storage provider Azure Storage, as well as Microsoft SQL Storage as a backend. So that's not the case for Netherite, which works differently. But if you are using one of those two, that's really super valuable because it's not completely self-explanatory what's happening there. Then, of course, there is also reference, funnily, to the Durable Functions Monitor project. And this project also got an update this week. It's now available in version 5.1. And has some, well, UI improvements, but also allows you now to have more decent filtering of the execution history, namely by time and field values, supporting in and not in filter operators. So that's really cool. And anyway, that's a super helpful extension when you work with durable functions. Staying with durable functions, there is also a new release out there of the durable functions package. And the most important news around that new release, I would say, is the updates all around HTTP retry options, difficult word, that have been brought forward by this release. Take a look at it. It's quite some nice features that came out there. With that, let's leave the purely serverless area and go to containers, maybe even serverless containers. First of all, I would like to highlight a customer story that was published on the Microsoft site, how Bosch is using Dapper and Azure in order to build their smart home offering. That's a really nice read, and always interesting to see how very big customers are leveraging those technologies and bringing things forward that you may be even using at home. Then, staying at Dapper, there is not only this customer story, but we have also a new release of Dapper that is now available, and that's Dapper 1.5. There are some release highlights, so some components have been upgraded to stable, like Kafka PubSub, as well as Azure Key Vault and Azure SQL Server Store, so they are now fully GA. And there have been a lot of other nice improvements in there, like actors for the Go SDK, support for ARM64 Max, and there are two new components that have been part of this release, and that's the Azure Cosmos DB Gremlin API binding, as well as the Alibaba Cloud Table Store binding. So that's really nice. Yeah, and this week a lot of new stuff came out, or a lot of GA releases, and Knative is one of them. So also Knative is now available as release 1.0, which basically showcases that you can now really use Knative in production. It was already used by a lot of customers in production in a release that was lower, 1.0. So this is just showcasing, hey, to everybody, hey, you can start now with that one. Having said that, of course, Knative is still quite young, so I would really expect a lot of improvements coming up, and also a lot of changes, even breaking changes. So simply be aware of that. It's a new project, nothing different to Kubernetes from my perspective. Then going to the serverless container area, of course, Azure Container Apps. There is one contribution by Tom Karkove, who joined Microsoft recently, and he references, or he brought up a new sample with Azure Container Apps using .NET Core workers that process Azure Service Bus messages. So all the code is available in his GitHub repository. I have referenced the tweet where Tom announces that within the show notes, and this also contains the GitHub link. So if you want to try it out, take a look at that one. With that, let's switch to DevOps and especially GitHub. First of all, one purely Azure-specific DevOps topic, namely Bicep. I have referenced a link to a page that contains Bicep demos, thanks to Gregor Sati that brought that up within a tweet where I stumbled across. And this is really a cool playground where you can play around with your Bicep template. And there are also tons of Bicep templates out there within the page that you can use in order to build up your own templating. So that's really, really cool. Then within GitHub, of course, news as every week. There is one blog post that I want to highlight, especially focusing on GitHub discussions and how you can, I would say, leverage the best practices around GitHub discussions in order to foster collaboration within your repository. It's focusing on 7 features that it's highlighting, and they are all outlined within the blog. I think GitHub discussions are super useful. So if you are using them or not yet using them, take a look at that blog post. Then there is a new beta feature available for GitHub issues, which allows you to track the code scanning alerts that you can activate within your repository, depending on different severities. How you can track them with GitHub issues, and especially with using task lists within GitHub issues, which is again super nice addition to the functionality that's already there, and very, very useful to really foster your work around GitHub issues. That's nice. And then not directly related to GitHub per se, but also a cool feature that I put into the bucket is that for Power Apps, there is now a pre-release functionality available that allows you to integrate Power Apps with GitHub as a repository, which also means you can, by this, collaborate on working on Power Apps. That's super cool because that really brings forward the story around Fusion development. Because now you have really this collaborative, nearly pro developer workflow in there. Then with GitHub Actions, there are also 2 news around that. First of all, that's nice for manual workflows. You can have now input types within your GitHub Actions for manual workflows, and the support is choice boolean and environment, as well as the string type that is default that you can now use in order to make your manual workflows more accessible from my perspective. And then there is also a new feature available for GitHub Actions, especially for composite actions, where you can now introduce conditional execution of steps. So you can now really model your workflow with if statements when you make a composition of your action. So this really, again, improves the usability of that feature a lot. Okay, yeah, that's already it from the DevOps side. As usual, GitHub is really pushing out things like crazy. And there are a lot of announcements around the more general world of Microsoft that I also want to mention. I already said .NET 6 came out this week. If you're working with .NET, I have referenced the announcement block of .NET 6, which is the fastest .NET yet. So they did a lot of performance improvements. I also referenced one of the blog posts that highlights that in a prior session, I think several weeks ago, if not months. And now this blog post really summarizes, I would say, everything. And it's a long one. So you really have to scroll through that. Basically everything that is coming with .NET 6 is described here, including C#, F#, and so on. And you also have all the references to the other blog posts that give you an even deeper dive into specific topics. So great times for .NET developers. Then there is another service that got GA, and that's the Azure Web PubSub service that's now generally available. That was quite fast. I think that's not out that long in the public preview phase, but it's now GA. That's cool, I think, especially for Azure Function scenarios. And leveraging that within Azure Functions-based or serverless-based architectures. And this release, which is really worth highlighting, also includes support for things that have not been there right from the start, like Azure Active Directory support and private endpoints. So that's cool. And then another announcement that was quite interesting to read is that Grafana Labs and Microsoft partner in order to provide a new Microsoft Azure service, which is leveraging the Grafana dashboard. Now that is, from two perspectives, interesting. First one is, of course, Microsoft has their own application insights and their boards and so on. So Microsoft really wants to give customers an alternative, especially if they are already using Grafana and using extensions in there and something like that. And the second point is that that's interesting for customers and also for, let's say, software as a service vendors, because Grafana made with a lot of its components a move to a GPL licensing. So, and this means that if you build those stuff within your software components, you also have to be GPL, which makes no sense for commercialization. So that's also one aspect that's worth to keep in your mind behind that new service, because with this service, you do not run into that pitfall. And then another announcement of YARP. YARP 1.0 is released, and YARP is yet another reverse proxy, which is a very customizable reverse proxy, and it's built purely on .NET. I have referenced the announcement blog post around that one, which gives you a lot of insights what's YARP all about, and references some further links where you can get deep dives. And what's important now, you might say, and I also had the notion, great, that's what the world wanted, another reverse proxy. But then I came across a tweet of Christian Denig, one of the cloud solution architects of Microsoft. And the point is that YARP 1.0 is already a fully battle-proven piece of software, because it's the reverse proxy that's, for example, running in Azure App Services or in Dynamics 365 as a reverse proxy. And that gives the story a complete different twist from my perspective. So I would say that's definitely worth looking at that one, if that's that battle-proven piece of software. Now with that, let's switch to the world in between SAP and Microsoft, where I only have one small but usual suspect contribution. Of course, it's Saturday, so SAP on Azure video podcast is out again with another edition. This time on SAP on Azure end-to-end telemetry, which I think is a very interesting and valuable topic for folks who are doing SAP on Azure. And I also want to highlight one thing. If you look at the show notes underneath the YouTube video, you will find that there is a little session around extending and integrating SAP solutions with Microsoft Power Platform and Teams. And as far as I have seen, that's a webinar that you can register to starting, I think, in December, if I'm not completely wrong. Yeah, it's on the 8th of December. So that's, I think, especially interesting for partners and customers who really would like to extend their SAP solutions with those collaboration tools and with low-code, no-code tools, because that's usually the low-hanging fruits from my perspective in order to make the first step into the extending SAP world with Microsoft. So if you want to be part of the game, I think that that makes sense to participate in that webinar. Then let's switch to learning and events. Once again, .NET. What a surprise this week. .NET Conf took Conference 2021 took place this week. And of course, with the announcement of .NET 6. And if you missed it, and if you want to catch up with some topics, some announcements, I have referenced the complete playlist that's available on YouTube. And with that, I also came across some nice learning and knowledge resource around the .NET architecture. So there is tons of .NET architecture guides available on the .NET.microsoft.com page around microservices, around DevOps, around cloud apps, also around modernizing, so kind of re-architecting your existing web and server architectures. And there are also references to a lot of ebooks that you can download. So this week with .NET 6, quite a lot of stuff around .NET. And then one last announcement for this week concerning an upcoming event on the 1st of December. The Technology Day that is hosted by InnoQ is having a second edition. So it started 2022. And now we have the second edition of this online conference on the 1st of December, starting at 11:30 and ending at 9 o'clock, with a lot of sessions all around technology, but also around other topics like DDD, domain-driven design, and also, let's say, soft skill topics. And this time also with one track completely in English. So last year, I think there were only German talks. I think there was one English talk, if I'm not completely mistaken. But now there is really one dedicated track for that one. And last year, that was really a really cool event, leveraging a lot of features for communicating and getting together in a virtual world. So really worth participating. And with that, I'm at the end of the news for this week. I hope I had some news for you. And with that, I wish you a nice Saturday, a great weekend, and a great next week. Don't forget about TechEd next week. Hopefully, we will see some news around SAP technology, and I have a bit of a broader SAP section within the next myNewsWrap. Until then, next Saturday we see you again. Bye.